What's up, my fellow Shield brothers? Much can change in the life of a man, as Eric the Red and Leif Erikson would discover, just like they would discover America. So, it's now often known that the Vikings were the first ones to discover the Americas. And they tried to set up small colonies in Vinland and Greenland and such. But what if Vikings successfully settled North America? So let's talk about their colonization with this helpful map right here. So, Eric the Red would discover America, discovering Greenland, the Baffin Island, and then Newfoundland, also known as Vinland, which is off the coast of Canada nowadays. The Norse colonization of North America began in the late 10th century AD when Norsemen explored and settled areas of the North Atlantic, including northeastern fringes of North America. Remains of Norse buildings were found near the northern tip of Newfoundland in 1960. This discovery aided in the recognition and the reignition of archaeological exploration for the Norse in North America. The Norse settlements in North American island of Greenland lasted for almost 500 years. The only confirmed Norse site is La Anse aux Meadows, which I believe is French, I'm sorry for that pronunciation, which is on the North American mainland. It was very small and it did not last long. While voyages, for example, to collect timber and the like, are likely to have occurred for the same time, there is no evidence of any lasting Norse settlements on mainland North America. So let's give some background on this. According to the sagas of Icelanders, Norsemen from Iceland first settled Greenland in the 980s. There is no special reason to doubt the authority of the information and the authenticity that the sagas supply regarding the very beginning of the settlements, but they cannot be treated as primary evidence for the history of Norse Greenland because they embody the literary preoccupations of writers and audiences in medieval Iceland that were not always reliable. Eric the Red, having been banished from Iceland for manslaughter, explored the uninhabited southwestern coast of Greenland during the 3 years of his banishment. He made plans to entice settlers to the area, naming it Greenland on the assumption that people would be more eager to go there because the land had a good name, and that the lands were supposedly fruitful there. The inner reaches of one long fjord named Eriksfjord, very creative I know, which was named obviously after him, was where he eventually established his estate, Brattahlid. He issued tracts of land to his followers from there. Norse Greenland consisted of 2 settlements. The eastern was at the southwestern tip of Greenland, while the western settlement was about 500 kilometers up the western coast, inland from present-day Nuuk. Smaller settlement near the eastern settlement is sometimes considered the middle settlement. The combined population of the 3 was around 2,000 to 3,000, and at least 400 farms have been identified by archaeologists. Norse Greenland had a bishopric and exported walrus ivory, furs, rope, sheep, whale, and seal blubber, live animals such as polar bears, and cattle hides from there. In 1126, the population requested a bishop, headquartered at Garthar, and in 1261 they accepted the overlordship of the Norwegian king. They continued to have their own law and became almost completely independent after 1349, the time of the Black Death. In 1380, the Norwegian kingdom entered into a personal union with the Kingdom of Denmark, thus bringing Greenland and Iceland under the rule of the Danes. So, this is North America at the time of the explorations. Iceland, Greenland, and the northern tips of America. And with Eric the Red from 983, the Vinland voyages, and then the hunting and trading voyages I just told you about with the exploits. So, in the 10th and 11th century of our timeline, small groups of Vikings explored Greenland, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia, and perhaps even New England. They established very small colonies, but these were all non-viable due to their small size and lack of support from home. but what if they had been able to establish sustainable colonies, and what would that mean for North America? So this was what would be needed for this to be able to work. Firstly, you would have to get some reason for many people to move there. People aren't just going to move to this unknown land, you would have to give them a good reason to. They were out at the end of a very long limb. Scandinavia itself wasn't very densely populated. The colony in Iceland was not big, and the colony in Greenland was tiny in comparison. It was like a series of stepping stones that went from small to smaller. Plus, it was very remote for people who navigated without any compass or specialized equipment for measuring sun angles and latitude such as this time period. Even people as brave as the Vikings were all discovered by accident, by ships being blown off course. So all this land shown on the left was discovered by accident. Even these brave Vikings might not want to go to America. So another problem with this is that the Scandinavians didn't bring the disease advantage that later colonists such as the English and Spanish did. Scandinavia was apparently one of the lowest areas for diseases in Europe. In fact, Scandinavians themselves suffered some from this. When the Black Death hit Norway, it supposedly killed up to 2/3 or more of the people there, in some areas as opposed to the 1/3 in many other areas of Europe because people in general had weaker immune system in the Scandinavian countries. On the other hand, Vinland did have some advantages. It was a much nicer place to live compared to Greenland or Iceland in many respects. And it had natives, which Iceland and southern Greenland had few or none, of which the Vikings first arrived. So if they got 1 or 2 colonies going and managed to avoid conflict with the natives for long enough, perhaps some of the Greenland colonists would move to this less harsh climate of Newfoundland or Nova Scotia. Greenland could end up being abandoned entirely, with Vinland becoming a go-to spot for people in Iceland or even Norway to escape to the New World. Greenland could become just another stop. Interestingly, however, a single ship with a few men and women accidentally reaching the New World would be enough to start a colony, for say, making it normal for fishing boats to be manned by women. I don't know how much that was very common for this time period, but it might increase the chances for this to happen, meaning that one ship could be enough to get this timeline going. So picture this. Let's say it happened in around the year 900. If those first colonists manage to survive the first few years alone, maybe they land on an island with no big permanent Amerindians settlements, somewhere around Newfoundland or so, they'd quickly be big enough to start an offspring of Viking civilization there. It's kind of an offshoot away from the other Norse, but it would still be able to exist there. If they know farming, at least some gardening to begin with, which many of them did, they'd even have an advantage over many North American Indians. Once the colony has reached about 200 people after about 100 years or so, so around the year 1000, it might be able to build boats big enough for reaching surrounding isles and the American continent. That might allow some trade with the natives, which would also be helpful in getting to know which plants can be eaten and how to prepare the ones that can only be eaten cooked, dried, or the likes. Meaning that in the year 1000, we can see a establishment and growth of a Viking civilization that is intermingling with the American Indians. After another 200 years ago, so roughly the year 1200, there could be 20,000 Scandinavians, growth limited by new illnesses like syphilis and the like, living in the Americas. There should be several small villages of 10 to 2,000 people scattered all over the whole area, just like in the Scandinavian countries. And some would be farming, and then bigger boats and so on would be able to greatly increase this. Wars with the natives will probably be avoided if this was able to work, if they started small and then met the Indians. But some adventurers might destroy small American Indian settlements in the area. They are still Vikings after all. They might still raid them for what they have. Not all of them, of course, but there might be a handful of raiding bands here and there that would do that to the American Indians. If the Vikings were to mix with the Amerindians, a mixed civilization would result. Amerindians would get slightly more European looks and some European technologies. This might lead to interesting changes in dealing with the natives later, when the British, the French, the Dutch, and the Spanish were to arrive, seeing how we are like 500 years, 400 years early here. And if there is no large mixing, and we just see a civilization in America such as on the right, there might be some smaller wars when the Vikings try to get to the continent, but there'd probably be little resistance on some isles and much of the far north. Both should allow for expansion of the core settlements and ships able to cross the Atlantic. After some time, the colonists will be able to have contact with the Norse, their forefathers, which should lead to an influx of traders, fishermen, colonists, and missionaries, and so on. Because after about 400 years, there would be these strange-looking Norsemen coming over from the west saying, hey, we survived and we have colonies here, meaning there would be an influx of interest in this Newfoundland. As it were cited. And if the Scandinavian Americans have stayed pretty Scandinavian in language, culture, and looks, etc., that would be a rather peaceful process, and there'd be a spread of the Scandinavians throughout Northeast America rather quickly. If big differences have developed in the meantime, a small war might erupt, after which the settlements are probably conquered within a few quick years, spreading the Norse influence. Either way, the northeast of North America turns into a Scandinavian-influenced nation, able to fight off explorers from other European powers there. The Spanish and Portuguese start their explorations earlier and conquer the south due to this knowledge brought by these Scandinavian Americans. Pretty similar to our timeline, but slower in some places due to more knowledge about Europeans and European abilities in the area from the American Indians. The plague will probably affect a lot of the area still, and it will come in combination with syphilis. Therefore, a population which would have been 2 million by 1400 is probably reduced to more like 600,000 in the year 1400. And on the right, you can see an artist depiction from Pinterest of what this new civilization of mixing could look like. So I'm going to call this new area Novum Nordmanni, which I believe in Latin means the New Norseman. So it will become independent about the year 1500 and to the year 1600, which means because it will just be too big and too far away for any Scandinavian powers to really try and control it, if it ever was controlled at all. It will also have extended to most of North and East America. Let's say that by the year 1700, Novum Nordmanni has split into a couple nation-states due to internal wars over land, population explosions, etc., and the evolution of technology. And in fighting between these nation-states have decreased the possible population. They are covering all of North America, including Alaska, while the area around Florida, Texas, and California is Spanish. In some ways, Novum Nordmanni can be very advanced and due to more farming and much more populous than what the Europeans found at the time of our timeline. In other ways, it probably misses out on a few European developments such as no free market, no industrialization, and misses of developments such as that. Therefore, the odds in any war against the Spanish are pretty even at this time, especially considering the fact that Spain was still a world power then, and the different Novum Nordmanni nations like to fight each other as well for land and the likes. But let's say Novum Nordmanni is increasingly powerful and they're spreading across North America due to this history and this population surplus and just the advantages it has of arriving in the Americas so early. By the year 1800, the population of Novum Nordmanni increased to 500 million people, or give or take. Just rough estimates here. America doesn't look like the America that we would know. More like a copy of Europe with small towns every few miles all over the country, such as in England or France. And it has a much similar population density to that of Europe or China or so on for this time period. Florida, Texas, and California have been taken away from the Spanish by this point. Thanks to the high population numbers, contact with Europe, and some economic competition with Europe, Novum Nordmanni has become as dominating as Great Britain in our timeline, due to it having not only the population of the Americans, but also because all of the resources that England and Spain would so direly want in our timeline, Novum Normandy has. Meaning that with the European influences, as well as its strength and development within the Americas, it is a very powerful power in its own right. Novum Normandy nations were able to grab a few parts of Australia even if they were able to sail west after the year 1800 or so, sending even more Norse Americans westwards, possibly discovering the likes of Hawaii and Australia. But that could be a different timeline entirely. By 1900, for say, the population could reach as much as 1 billion people, not as much as it sounds considering the big space and the development in places like Europe and China at the time. 1 billion people sounds like a lot, but then when you think about how much space there is within America and Canada and Alaska and all of that, because that's all going to be Novum Normandy nation states united there, that's a lot of space for 1 billion people to be spread out across. The technological lead has gone to Novum Normandy at this point. Europeans forming bigger blocks earlier, such as, the later on coalitions of the Napoleonic Wars, that kind of block, or even later in the Cold War. These kind of blocks are going to be more prevalent in Europe as these smaller nations in Europe fall behind quicker due to Novum Normandy's advantages that they have. By today's time, there would be close to 2 billion people living there. That's Europe plus Southeast Asia on twice as large and fertile territory, including USA, Canada, and possibly Australia. Meaning that when it industrializes in 1800, it has all of this time, and then 1900, it has all of this land and all of this rich history together that the Novum Normandy nation states and towns and cities spread across all of this land shown here is going to be able to industrialize and spread very rapidly, which is why the Novum Normandy would become the technological powerhouse in the world theater. And it's really mind-boggling if you think about it, how if the Vikings way back in 900 had been able to establish a decent colonies, or a handful of decent colonies in the Americas, we might see an entirely different world, an entirely different American landscape. It would be nothing like we would understand. It would look nothing the same, other than landscape, of course, but I'm saying ethnically and technologically and economically, it would be nothing like we have ever seen. And the Novum Normandy, as I like to call them, would just be such a powerhouse and such an interesting peoples from the mixing, because there would probably be mixing between the Norsemen and the American Indians, as well as between those two with the Spanish and the Spanish lands that the Novum Normandy would take. Meaning, there would be such a powerful Novum Normandy nation within the Americas. I hope you enjoyed this. I put a lot of work into this what if. I know it's been a long time since we've had a what if. It's been at least, 2 or 3 months since the last what if. Well, this has been what if the Vikings were able to colonize America. I had a lot of fun with this, just going off on this little storyline of what could happen and how the population would ebb and flow. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, leave me a like. Feel free to subscribe. Check out the other videos. If you have any comments or suggestions, you can always leave that down for me in the comment section down below. As always, this has been the Shield Brother for the History Armada, and I'll catch y'all next time.